What is up, Key Issues legends? Nick here, and I wanted to take a minute at the beginning of this video to address two really important things that you need to know about what you're about to watch. First, and probably most importantly, this video is going to contain massive spoilers for Avengers Endgame. If you haven't seen that film yet, you're probably like the last person, so come back when you've seen it. I don't want to be the person who ruins it for you. After all, there are at least 9,000 other websites and YouTubers that are trying to do that for me, so good luck dodging those. Second, this video is an opinion piece. Please try to recognize that this whole video and all of its contents are just my opinion. It's not a reflection on you as a person if you disagree. I have grown to become a big Thor fan, and this video is going to discuss the elements about him that I like and the elements about him that I dislike. So if you don't like my opinion, cool. Just don't be a dick about it in the comments. Thor is kind of a complicated box office property. The general majority of moviegoers seem to forget that Thor was viewed from a critical and financial viewport pretty poorly just a couple years ago. Thor and Thor: The Dark World were two of the lowest grossing Marvel films when adjusted for inflation. In fact, Thor: The Dark World is actually the lowest grossing MCU film, period. For being a character with two films, this character's actions in team-up films always came across as playing a second fiddle, with Thor being reduced to a guy that just kinda smashes crap, almost like the backup Hulk. And when the entire cinematic universe like the MCU is doing really well and one character is not, you have a problem. You need to course correct and change elements of that character around, or shelve him until you can figure it out. And I think this is where we found ourselves with Thor after Age of Ultron. The Thor standalone films, in my opinion, suffered from a number of flaws. The stories were kinda generic and boring, and the pacing was either too slow in Thor or too fast in Thor: The Dark World. Loki was an incredible villain, but for every positive aspect Loki brought to the table, Malekith kinda lacked in the follow-up. Thor 1 had some great action in the beginning, but then Thor loses his powers, and he pretty much spends the majority of the movie dicking around on Earth with a cast of characters that we know are never really going to end up in any significant stance in the MCU. And of course, the entire plot to Thor: The Dark World was just kind of bland and uninspired. All of this combined with a romance arc in these films that kind of felt tired, boring, and forced, and the whole thing just wasn't a great package. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the public was not on board with Thor films. Sure, comic book lovers loved Thor films, but, the general majority of everybody else did not. He didn't really work in the role of the straight man, while all of this comedy was constantly surrounding him. It didn't work. Now, one of the many positive elements of Marvel Studios is that sometimes Marvel Studios does a really good job of showing us something in these characters that we didn't know that we wanted. In fact, Chris Hemsworth even recently said in an interview that he was burned out of playing Thor before Thor Ragnarok. And that film's success reinvigorated his desire to even play the role. And he even pitched that Thor should be more like Ragnarok in Avengers Infinity War and in Endgame. Now, the character of Thor rebounded pretty massively thanks to the breakout success of Thor Ragnarok. Director Taika Waititi did a number of brilliant things with the franchise and the character by essentially shifting the status quo for Thor completely. First, he removed Thor from Earth and removed Thor's beloved hammer Mjolnir. Thor's entire identity as a hero and an Avenger was that he was the protector of Midgard, Thor the Worthy. But as Odin so effortlessly put it, the real thing that this movie showed us was that Thor wasn't the god of hammers, he's the god of thunder. Next, they moved the setting. The majority of the film was spent between Sakaar and Asgard. Sakaar allowed Thor to explore just how powerful he could be without Mjolnir by pairing him up against the Incredible Hulk in one of the best fights in the MCU. I mean, let's face it, pretty much any time Hulk and Thor fight somebody, it's one of the best fights in the MCU, so they didn't really have to try. This one was going to be a banger no matter what. Fans may not have got a true answer to who the strongest Avenger was, but the fight and the character's subsequent banter was fun. Sakaar required Thor to use his brains and wits to escape, rather than just one-dimensionally bashing his way through the plot as he had done in Thor and in Dark World, and in the Avengers, and in all of Age of Ultron. Thor's character growth throughout Ragnarok was also more significant and complex. The film's comedic effect worked well, but it was also successful at being dark when it needed to be. This was a big improvement over the first two films, who, in my opinion, simply lacked a consistent tone. Hela was a fantastic villain with true motivation and a real challenge to Thor in terms of strength. Hela forced Thor to reevaluate his place within Asgard by usurping his right to rule, and in so doing forced him to take his place as their new king. This, combined with the fact that Thor could no longer rely on Mjolnir, allowed him to embrace the side of him that he never truly mastered, his Thunder God abilities. The audience learned that Thor's hammer was just a vessel for Thor to channel his already incredible strength through. In my eyes, and in the eyes of many fans, Thor grew significantly as a hero, and he finally stepped into a role that was less one-dimensional and self-centered, and more kingly. One last element about Ragnarok that I really wanted to discuss is that it removed the really tired romance element that had become baked into this character. And don't get me wrong, I like Natalie Portman and her character as Jane Foster was alright, but we wanted to see Thor focus on heroism instead of kind of being blinded by his pursuit of love. I think more often than not these romance arcs are included in these films because directors feel like they have to put them in there, and I think that audiences are pretty much over that. This character's growth continued right into Avengers Infinity War. Thor loses half of his people to Thanos, who kills his brother, kills Heimdall, and leaves him for dead. Instead of backing down, Thor bands up and goes on this epic quest to avenge the people he's lost by forging Stormbreaker. Along the way, Thor also happens to meet the Guardians of the Galaxy, who he seems to pair up really well with. After forging Stormbreaker, his power is amplified, and his actions in the film made him a complete fan favorite and standout of the film. Many videos on YouTube, including our own, marked him as the de facto strongest Avenger going forward and a clear badass. So here we are with this new version of Thor, carrying Stormbreaker, clearly the strongest Avenger, on a road to become the king and redeem everybody he's lost, and you wonder, how could they possibly improve this character going into Endgame? Well, the answer's pretty simple. They couldn't. In my opinion, every positive piece of character growth that Thor went to was tossed out the window during Endgame. During the beginning mission of Endgame, we see Thor eager to avenge the fallen by bringing the god pain to Thanos. So the Avengers suit up and they go to Thanos' vacation house where they bum rush him and kick his ass. After learning that Thanos used the stones again to destroy the stones, Thor takes Thanos up on a suggestion from Infinity War and aims for the head, decapitating him. And this was a pretty sobering moment for Thor, as he was the one who felt that he failed the most of any Avenger. He was the first person to fight Thanos and he lost, and he made the mistake of not going for the head the second time he fought him. The entire decimation was, in his opinion, on his shoulders, and damn it, Hemsworth showed us all of this and more in his performance at the beginning of Endgame. However, at this point in time, we flash forward 5 years, and after some other events, we end up going to New Asgard and meeting up with future Thor. Hulk and Rocket go and try to talk Thor into joining their new plan, and he is a bumbling and pathetic fat drunk. Gone is the king of Asgard. Gone is the triumphant thunder god. Gone is quite possibly the most dedicated hero on the Avengers roster, who was willing to sacrifice his own life for a shot at forging a weapon that might be able to take on Thanos. Instead, we are gifted with this hot mess of a once proud hero who's playing Fortnite and drinking more than me, which is honestly pretty impressive. Thor spends virtually the rest of Endgame being the comedic relief for any scene that he's in, except it's not funny, it's pathetic. It's obvious that he's supposed to be pathetic at first. You're supposed to think, wow, he's really emotionally broken, but it just never gets any better. Thor is eventually tasked with going back in time with Rocket to retrieve the ether, and he just kind of acts like a dipshit the whole time. Thor went from being the kind of Avenger who would sacrifice all of Asgard to protect the 9 realms from his sister to not being able to go through with the mission because he sees his mommy. Rocket gives him a really rational pep talk, and he comes up to him and he's like, listen man, you need to man up, let's get this done, you can get back everything you've lost if we just do this thing. And instead, Thor goes and acts like an idiot. When he does finally meet up with his past version of his mother, the pep talk she gives him is just not good. It doesn't land. It lacked the sincerity that the character needed, and I think the whole segment was almost a callback to things about the character in previous films that just didn't work. The only thing I could really compare it to is a CW show like Arrow or The Flash, where the heroes keep making the same mistakes and never learning from them ever. This story element ends with Thor calling out for Mjolnir and reaffirming with himself that he's still worthy, but it doesn't really do anything as a scene to address his behavior. At one point, I started to fantasize that we were going to get a truly fan-servicing type of moment where Thor would reach out for Mjolnir, and when it hit his hand, he would transform into the Thor we all knew, shredded, suited up in armor, and ready to go. Now, keep in mind, I agree that this would have been a ridiculous and hokey thing to happen. I was actually just so desperate to get the Thor I liked back that I was willing to accept that shitty of a plot element just to get it. When Thor gets back to Earth, they end up trying to determine who's going to use Iron Man's Infinity Gauntlet, and Thor continues to act very childishly, and you would think that he would have been broken of that cycle by the multiple pep talks that he just endured. Throughout the rest of the film, he does eventually go on to take on Thanos. His fight scenes are pretty good, but Cap really steals the show in terms of the final battle, somehow managing to out-Thor Thor. Now, Thor's future in terms of a Thor 4 is kind of in jeopardy right now. They haven't really announced that film, and I think the reason for that is because Marvel was heavily criticized about, announcing Spider-Man Far From Home and Black Panther 2 and the Doctor Strange sequel before Infinity War came out. Many fans viewed the events of Infinity War as bait for future films, considering we knew that these characters were coming back due to the sequels that they had in development already. At the end of Endgame, Thor joins the Guardians of the Galaxy, which he dubs the Asgardians of the Galaxy, and I think that the MCU executives chose to put him there because, as Infinity War proved, his character fits well within them. After all, Thor is humorous, and he's not entirely unfamiliar with the cosmos, as we learned during the dialogue in Infinity War. Thor works really well in a humorous environment, but I worry that his character will be competing with the other characters in the film like Star-Lord, Rocket, and Drax, and I'm hoping that maybe during the events of the upcoming films he starts to regain just a little bit more of his seriousness. I think we can all agree that Thor was pretty funny in Thor Ragnarok and in Infinity War, but it did seem to strike a better balance of seriousness and humor. The MCU is going to continue full steam ahead. Avengers Endgame was a runaway success, and Marvel would be crazy not to include Thor in the mix going forward. What role he plays will be interesting to see, but I would hate to see him continue into this backslide. After all, we already have seen this exact same thing happen to the Incredible Hulk. But that's also a video for another day. Thank you guys for watching this video, and today's question is pretty simple. Did you like Thor in Avengers Endgame? Let us know down in the comments. It's a small question, but your answers are sure to be unique, and we want to read them. If you enjoyed this video and our discussions on the god of Thunder, then feel free to like and subscribe. Also check out our Discord channel, that link is in the description. We have tons of comic book movie fans in there ready to and willing to discuss anything with you. Thanks for watching this video. This has been Nick from Key Issues, and you know the motto, comics over everything.